Hello and welcome to Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 288. I'm Lisa Louise Cook. Finding female ancestors poses unique challenges that can throw roadblocks in your way. And the reason for that is really simple. The women in our family tree assume the surname of their husbands when they marry. Now, since in genealogy, we're researching backwards through time, we actually encounter their married surname first. So it's really critical that we locate the records that mention the women's maiden name so that we can find her parents and continue to climb her family tree. Well, professional genealogist Shelley Bishop has come to the rescue in her new Family Tree magazine article. It's called Ladies in Waiting. And in that article, she covers 12 resources for discovering maiden names. And I'm happy to say that she's here to tell us about it right now. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is a great article, and I think it's going to help so many people kind of bust through that roadblock that they run into. And it really is kind of a roadblock, isn't it?
It really can be. It can be a real challenge. And whether you've done a little bit of genealogy or a lot of research, it can definitely be a stumbling block for you.
Well, I love it. You've got 12 places for us to go and look. So take us to the first location. What's your first resource for finding maiden surnames?
Well, the first thing you're going to probably want to do is see if you can find a marriage record. I think that's probably the natural place to begin. And marriage records don't exist for all times and all places. So as you go back further in time, you may find that there aren't really marriage records. But if there are, that is going to definitely be the first place you want to look. Most marriage records could have been created at the local level. More recent ones often at the state level. And they will usually say the woman's maiden name on there. And there can be some other clues if it doesn't state it.
That's a great point. And kind of closely related to that are family records, right? The records that maybe she's been collecting over the years and you might even find in our own drawers and around our house.
Absolutely. Family sources can be amazing. You might find mention of a woman in a diary or letters. You might read letters and they might expose relationships and names that you weren't aware of or places that you weren't aware of. And it's also important to talk to some family members who might know a little more or who might have some of these family materials and keepsakes that you could look at and ask them if they'd be willing to talk with you and maybe share with you. Maybe you can copy some of their things. That's a great way to get a start.
Now, let's see here. You've got the family sources, the civil marriage records. What about religious records? I think you had that as number 3.
I did, yes. So when there isn't a record of a civil record of a marriage, there could still be a religious record of a marriage. So you would want to check church records and see what church records exist, again, for that time and place and where they might be held now, because that can change over time. And there's a lot of different places too. You might look at the baptism records of children because those will often state the mother's maiden name. And again, these are church records. So there's a variety of church records that can help you.
And church records often go a lot farther back than the civil records, don't they?
Definitely. If you're lucky, they can go quite far back. And even in pioneer areas, sometimes a traveling preacher would keep his or her own records. And some of those little journals and so forth have been discovered and published now. So you can even find those.
Fantastic. So that's 3. Now, number 4, and you touched on the children. You have here children's vital records. So what are we looking for there?
Yes, children's vital records can be great. So we're looking at birth records of children if they exist, The marriage records of children sometimes will state the mother's maiden name, which is a real find. And the death records of a child may also state the maiden name. So those things are really worth checking out. You want to look for records of all of the woman's children, not just the one that you're descended from. You want to look at all of her children that she had, even if they were by a different husband, because you just never know what you might find there. And if she had a child who died young, which is a sad situation, but that record may give the mother's maiden name, and it's a good place to look also.
Now, you mentioned looking at all the different children. Is that, I know for me and some of my families, I find that different children, whether they were born earlier or later in the woman's life, sometimes that surname kind of looks a little different on some of those. Is that the reason to look at all of them?
It does.
Variations on the name?
The spelling of the surname and everything can change. Sometimes the children weren't exactly sure how the surname was pronounced or spelled. They just knew it was sort of like something. So you will get variations. And so when you find those, just compare them between the different records and be generous in your searching and try different variations, definitely, when you're conducting searches.
Yeah, I know. Even with my grandmother, she would say Mikulowski with an M, but it was Nikolowski with an N. So it's like checking every one of those records really helps find which is the most regularly used.
That's a great example.
All right. Yeah. So number 5, what have you got as our 5th resource for finding maiden names?
The 5th resource would be death records. And that would be both the death record of the woman herself, of course, but also, again, death records of the children, death records of her husband or husbands. They could provide her maiden name. And then if you find anyone else who is associated with her, I can't overstate the importance of doing whole family research, because women relied on other people in their lives, and they relied on men, especially. So their brothers-in-laws, their husbands, obviously, their fathers while their fathers were alive, and so forth. But those death records are something you're going to want to explore for everybody that you think she might have been associated with or that might have been related to her.
That's a great point, that cluster research.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine when we get to the point of finding her death record, that's a much later record. And she's not standing right there making sure the name gets written down correctly. So if we can find earlier death records of associated people, that sounds like maybe it might be more accurate.
Yes, that's true. And unfortunately, a lot of times, especially if a woman lived to enjoy ripe old age, they didn't even know her maiden name. And you'll find unknown on the line where it should be. So that's one of the things that we try to overcome. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's why this article is great. You're going to help us get past the unknown.
Exactly.
So number 6, I see here, cemetery sources. We're going to find maiden names in cemetery sources.
Yeah, so, gravestones don't give you a whole lot of information, just usually dates. But finding out, you can try to find out, like, are there records that the cemetery has, who purchased the plot that she's buried in, and that kind of thing, and who is she buried with. You can get great clues from seeing who she's buried with, and sometimes that's not apparent when you're just looking at a single gravestone record online. So if you can, I always recommend trying to go to the cemetery and see how those graves are positioned and see who she's buried with. Or you might find a published transcription that's been done by a society where the graves have not been put in alphabetical order. They've just been put in the order in which they were encountered when they were read. And that can also be another source of clues. So you can find, sometimes you can find a young child who's buried with his or her maternal grandparents. I had a big breakthrough that way one time, and that was the source of the maiden name. I knew this couple had a child, Unfortunately, she died young. She was buried with her mother's parents. So.
Gosh, it's amazing how many different ways you might just stumble into it like that. Number 7, you have census records. And I think if she's living in her household with her husband, you might not see it there. How will census records help us?
So census records can help in a lot of other ways, especially if the woman is widowed later in life. Then she might be living with an adult son or adult daughter in the home of a son-in-law, for instance. And so that is a great way to find somebody. If you find a woman living in old age in with a man whose name you don't recognize, and then another person that could be a daughter, that's really a clue to investigate. And likewise, if the woman herself died young, her children may have been taken in by her parents or her sister or something like that. So you may find, if she died at age 36 or something like that, you may find her children living with her parents in another census record.
Interesting. I've even seen by looking through the census records, and like you were talking about the cluster research of looking at all the different family members, seeing a name of a child either in her family or her sister's family, and that name really sounds like a surname. Like Conover was one I ran into. That was her maiden name. And it was being used as a first name for other children in the extended family.
Yes, that does happen. Maiden names were used as first names. That was a pretty popular practice in some areas. And it can be a clue to the mother's maiden name. It can also be a clue, believe it or not, to the grandmother's maiden name. Sometimes they would take it back a generation farther. So when you see a first name, I had someone named Greenman as the first name. His name was Greenman. Well, that's a surname, right? So I had to work back to find the Greenman, and it ended up being 2 generations the surname. But yes.
Today's episode is sponsored by MyHeritage, a global discovery platform enjoyed by 110 million people worldwide. MyHeritage has it all and offers a full-service experience that bridges your past, present, and future. MyHeritage has developed powerful genealogy tools to enrich your family tree and take your research to the next level. Receive automatic matches to family trees of fellow MyHeritage users and historical records, which provide new details that you can add to your tree. Explore 12 billion historical records to uncover fascinating new insights about your ancestors. Add new information to your family tree in one click. Check your tree for inaccuracies, colorize your black and white photos, and connect with relatives around the globe. MyHeritage makes it all possible and puts the discoveries at your fingertips. I've been colorizing some of my own personal family photos, and not only are they beautiful, but in many of the photos, it's actually been revealing more details so I can see more of my family history. Growing your family tree is easier than ever before with MyHeritage. The discoveries are out there and waiting to be made. Visit myheritage.com and try it today. That's myheritage.com. Okay, number 8, one of my favorite record sources, newspapers. A good place to find maiden names?
Oh my gosh, that is a fantastic place. You would want to look, just depending on, again, the time period and the locality that you're working on, but you want to look for marriage announcements, which can vary anywhere from just a short little, social note to, a long, elaborate marriage announcement. Those will almost always say that the name of the bride, the full maiden name of the bride. And you can also look for golden anniversary announcements. If they've been married a long time, had a 50th anniversary, a lot of times they'll give a whole rundown of when and where they married and their parents. Sometimes they'll even name their parents, and they'll talk about people who attended the anniversary party, which could be her siblings. And the other things are social notices. If they went from out of town to visit relatives or something like that, you might find that. And of course, obituaries. and obituaries not only of the woman and her husband, but also her children. And again, anyone that you think might have been related to you, anyone to her, anyone you think might have been her sister or her brother, try to find those. Newspapers are a great resource, and I know you've done a lot of work on them. Your book is a great guide to using newspapers.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh gosh, I just love them. And like you said, there's so many different types of articles that can have that information. Okay. So gosh, we're already up to number 9. What's number 9?
Number 9 is published sources. And those would include things like those old county and town histories, where they might talk about the early settlers of a region, who founded those, with the first members of the early churches. A lot of times you'll find women's names in there. And you also sometimes find a biographical sketch. Could be of her husband, her son, or her grandson. And that could be in a far distant city and state than where she ever lived. But you might find information there. And then published family histories are another place to look. A lot of times they will give the maiden names of women who married into the family. And then, of course, you have online family trees, which have to be taken with a little grain of salt, because that they're not always as well documented as we'd like them to be. And we have to be kind of careful about just accepting what they say. But that's true, too, of the published resources. We also have to verify that information. So in these kinds of sources, you definitely want to do additional research to verify, to either confirm or refute the information.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. All right. And number 10, court records.
Court records. So a woman's status when she was married historically, she was a femme couverte, where she was literally covered by her husband's care. And she could not make any court decisions or any financial arrangements or anything like that in her own name. Her husband was in charge of all of that for her. Now, when she was widowed, then she could take care of her own affairs. But so estate records, you might want to look at estate records of a possible father. And those will usually name both her husband and herself in these estate records. And you'll want to look at, did they receive property? Were they named in a will? And so forth, like that. So you will often see a woman named with her husband in estate records. Guardianship records could have been created if the woman died while her children were still young. Guardianships were done to protect the property of the children against other people who might come later and try to claim that property, including a woman's future husbands. So they were to protect the children's interest in that. So guardianship records are another place to look. And then divorce records. If the woman got divorced, that you often find her maiden name in that, because they will go back to the original marriage and talk about that.
Oh, good point. Number 11, deeds. Interesting. We can find maiden names in deeds.
You can occasionally find maiden names in deeds, and sometimes if you can't find the maiden name, at least you can find good clues there. Again, if she had a father or a widowed mother who died and left property, sometimes there's not a will, and sometimes there's not a probate or estate file. In that case, you want to check the deeds, because if they owned property, it might have just passed down to the children without going through the courts. And if that's the case, then the children had to decide how to divide up the property, or they had to liquidate it. And so often some of them would sell their shares to another one, or they might also sell their shares to a third party. So you want to look in the deeds, and these are called quitclaim deeds, because the person is quitting, basically giving up their claim to their share of the property. So if you find a deed that has that word quitclaim in it, that's a good indication that there are other people who are invested in that property who also have an interest in it, and that you might be able then to find those people, find out how they're related, and then who owned the property that they are now dealing with.
Wow, you have terrific strategies. I mean, so many different creative ways to come at this problem of trying to find
there are a lot of ways,
these maiden names. And the last one is one I would imagine a lot of people haven't thought of, but I agree with you. I think it's a great resource. Number 12, you have military pension records. Tell folks about that.
So if your mystery woman was married to someone who served in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, or the Civil War, you want to check to see if either the soldier or his widow applied for a pension after the fact, because those pension records can be a gold mine. You can learn so much from them. They're really, really interesting to read. So there's indexes to those, and I talk about those in the article, where to find those. And you can look for them, and you can order the entire file from the National Archives, or sometimes those files now some of them have been digitized. And you can look through it and see. In some cases, they will lay out exactly the woman's maiden name, when she was married. They'll name the children and their ages. You can really learn a lot. So,
well, we have really learned a lot from you. Gosh, Shelley, I think you've kind of smashed the idea that, we just have to be stuck by not knowing a woman's maiden name. There are so many other places to go and look. And with some little bit of diligent effort, I think we have a really good chance of success. Of course, we've been talking about Shelley's strategies, these 12 strategies she goes into in detail in her article, Ladies in Waiting. It's in the March-April issue of Family Tree Magazine. And you can find Shelley Bishop at buckeyefamilytrees.com. It's been so fun to catch up with you and talk about this topic. I hope you'll come back again soon. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you having me. And I just want to tell everybody, keep at it, keep searching, and best of luck with finding those maiden names.
I've got some great resources for you for finding maiden surnames. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about two companies that have a lot to offer you in your genealogical research. I'm continuing to have great success over at newspapers.com finding articles about my family. It just amazes me how I continue to find new information. And that's why I'm so happy to tell you that today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, because they really are your go-to resource for unlocking the stories of your ancestors. You can dive into the newspapers where your family's history just unfolds as you search nearly 1 billion records, and you can do that in seconds. Newspapers.com offers an unparalleled treasure trove of historical newspapers, providing a window into the past. With papers from the 17th century all the way to today, newspapers.com is the largest online newspaper archive. It's a gold mine for anyone seeking to uncover stories from the past. So whether you're a seasoned genealogist or you're just starting on this exciting journey, newspapers.com makes it really easy to search for things like obituaries and birth announcements and those everyday stories that shaped your family. It's kind of like having a time machine at your fingertips. And here's the best part. I'm so happy to tell you that our listeners get an exclusive offer. Use promo code Genealogy Gems for a 20% discount on your subscription. It's Genealogy Gems all together, no spaces. And you go to newspapers.com, put in Genealogy Gems, you're going to get 20% off your subscription, and you're going to start finding newspaper articles. So I wouldn't wait any longer. Go sign up today at newspapers.com and embark on a journey of discovery. This podcast is brought to you by Archives, your trusted resource for researching your family history. Archives is a vast repository of historical records, offering a seamless journey through your family's past. Imagine discovering long-lost relatives, exploring genealogical documents, and tracing the roots that define your story. Archives makes research quick and easy with an intuitive approach to genealogy. They keep their search tools simple, but behind the scenes, their extensive record collections are paired with powerful technology to deliver valuable results. Archives is an invaluable resource if you want to make your family history research simple and affordable. Just visit archives.com and let your family history journey begin. Wow, Shelley Bishop really had 12 great strategies for finding maiden names of female ancestors. Let's do a quick recap and also maybe talk about some of the places where you can find these types of records. So she had number 1, marriage records. Number 2 was family records. 3, church records. Number 4, children's vital records. Number 5, death records. Number 6, cemetery sources. Number 7, census records. Number 8, newspapers. 9, published sources. 10, court records. 11, deeds. And 12, military pension records. So that's a lot of options for us. And where can we find some of these records? I love when I have a genealogy research question, I'll kind of jot it down in a note and start to try to build a framework, particularly if I'm having trouble finding a record. So if our question is, where can I find this maiden name? Well, we've already got a good start on our research strategy because we've got 12 different types of records identified. Next to each of those, you could make a quick list of where are you going to look to find these records. And we've got several resources for you at the genealogygems.com website to help you out if some of these are new for you. And I say new in the fact that these days, we put our information in an online family tree and that starts generating hints. And a lot of times, these records are going to automatically come to you through the hints. You still have to look at them, review them, analyze them, and verify them, make sure that they really are the correct records. But in the case where that doesn't happen, then you've got to just do it the way we've always done it, which is you've got to track down where these records are held and see if you can gain access to them. So as you're taking a look at each of these records, what I would recommend you do is go over to genealogygems.com. You can also go to lisalouisecook.com. And in the menu under genealogy videos, click videos and show notes. There you're going to find a list of categories and click the records link. That's going to jump you way down the page to our section that lists out all the different videos that I've done on the topic of different record collections. And so for strategy number 1, we're looking for marriage records. If you haven't had it come automatically to you through a hint, well, you're going to have to go find it. And we have a couple of videos there that can really help you do that. One is called Marriage Records, 5 Steps for Finding Them. And then I did kind of a 2-part video series with genealogist J. Mark Lowe. And the first one was called Marriage Records Case Study, where he kind of went through a case study, much like you might be tackling yourself. And you can kind of see how that all played out. It's going to give you lots of great ideas. And then the second follow-up was Marriage Records and Gretna Green. And that's addressing that situation where perhaps your ancestors were married in a different location for different sets of reasons. It may have been easier to get married there. Maybe somebody was underage in another jurisdiction, and so they needed to go to a Gretna Green. Mark covers all of that in these videos. So there's 3 videos right there for you that are going to help you dig deeper and find the records that Shelley has been suggesting for us. Now, strategy number 2 that she mentioned was family records. And also in our collection of videos on records, you will find one there that I think could really help out. And that's the one on family Bibles. It's hard to imagine you could spend a whole video doing that, but really there's a lot that you can find surprisingly online But if not online, different strategies for tracking them down in person, maybe somebody else in a distant relative who may have a family Bible. That's a great resource for family records. And then strategy number 3 was church records. And we have covered that in depth with Sunny Morton. And she wrote a book about church records. Those are definitely a different strategy to track down than if you were going for the vital records that are created at the county level, let's say. So rather than a marriage license at your county clerk, you're going to want to try to find which church your ancestors were associated with and what types of records they have available. And that may surprise you on how much really is available. Sunny's got a lot of great strategies on that. And of course, for each of these video resources to help you tackle these strategies, look for the link to the downloadable handout, or we call it the cheat sheet for each video or podcast episode. If you are a premium member, then you can download that and you're going to have it, all the bullet points, step by step, the kinds of strategies and links to the record websites that we talk about in each of these videos. So don't miss that. We typically have that link sometimes at the top of the page, oftentimes down at the bottom under the resources section. So strategy number 4, I really liked this, the children's vital records. And you could really almost call this children's records generally, not just their vital records, but other records about the children of the woman that you're trying to find the maiden name for. Those maiden names can pop up in surprising places. They could be written in the margin of a child's record. Of course, each person in our family has a tremendous amount of records potentially associated with them, and any of those potentially could mention the maiden name of somebody's mom. And it could be for a variety of reasons. So I would say for strategy number 4, not just the vital records themselves, but just expand that, kind of think of it in terms of cluster research, researching the people around the woman that you are trying to identify the maiden name for. Strategy number 5 is death records. And in fact, as I'm putting this episode together, I'm also working on a premium podcast episode. So in addition to videos, of course, we have our free podcast and we have a podcast exclusively for our premium members. And the new episode that's coming out October 2024 is number 210. And that one is devoted to death-related records. I kind of started it working on burial records and I realized, no, we need to cover the whole gamut. And that's exactly what we do in that episode. If you already have an obituary or you already have a death certificate, don't stop there because there are so many different types of death records. And again, those maiden names could be right there in them. So when you're working on kind of a brick wall situation, you want everything that you can get your hands on. And so definitely check out Premium Podcast episode number 210, which will be out right on the heels of this episode. The 6th strategy was cemetery records. And again, over in our video collection, you will find the video Cemetery Research and Finding the Stories. That was a fun video to put together. It's an interview with Joy Neighbors. She's an expert on cemetery research, and there are lots of strategies for you there. Strategy number 7 was census records. Those are pretty straightforward. Keep in mind, in addition to the U.S. federal census, you might also want to look for the state census. So how do you figure out if there was a state census? Because those were not done every 10 years like the U.S. federal census was. You could do that over at the Family Search Wiki. Head to familysearch.org/wiki, and you'll see a map on the main screen. Just click on North America, click on the state that you're researching, and then look over at the right side of the page under record types. Click census, and typically you're going to find there a listing of all of the schedules that are available. So there's the population schedules, there's non-population schedules, there's state and territorial census records. Rather than guessing, the wiki is going to tell you when these things were created and when they were not created. And that way you'll know exactly what you're targeting and what to go look for. Number 8 was newspapers, and we've got lots of resources for you on that. We've got getting the scoop on your ancestors, 5 top search tips, how to find newspapers over at Google Books. Yep, there's lots of free newspapers at Google Books as well. So wonderful resources for that. I would say, if your first stop is going to be over at the Library of Congress and the Chronicling America website, because that's absolutely free. And then you can expand out from there. And of course, she went on to published sources, court records, deeds, and military pension records. We've covered all of these over the years, so definitely not only check out that list of videos under the records section, but also you could go over to our podcast page. And here's just kind of a tip for finding topics that we've already covered here on the show, where you could go in and listen again, maybe download the cheat sheet for that particular record type. In the case of our free podcast, if you click on Genealogy Podcast, the free Genealogy Gems podcast on our website, you're going to see them listed, starting with the most recent. And I try really hard to include the keywords that target the topics that we're talking about. So one of the simplest things that you can do on your computer is just do Control F on your keyboard. That's going to pop up a little search box at the top of the page, and you could type in a word like cemetery and hit enter on your keyboard. That is going to immediately take you to the spot on that long list of podcast episodes that mentions that record type. So it's a really easy way to jump around. And over the years, I've been doing this show since 2007. We've covered some of these topics multiple times, so you can get different ideas in different episodes. It'll jump you to any podcast episode listed there of the 288 so far that have talked about that subject. So that's just kind of a quick tip for finding what you're looking for. And that works too on the premium podcast page. Go to that page. And again, you could do the Control F, or you'll also find a search box on that page, and that should take you there as well. So there's lots of content available for you. The trick is to go and download those handouts. If you're a premium member, take another listen to some of these and make sure that you're getting all of the available records to find those elusive maiden names. I wish you lots of success in your search. And if you happen to be new to this podcast, welcome. And I think the next thing I'd love to have you do is head over to genealogygems.com and click the free newsletter sign up button. It's a red button on the home screen, and you can sign up for my free email newsletter. That's how we can stay in touch with each other. I send out emails letting you know what the latest and newest content is that we have on our website, and featuring different ideas and strategies. Typically, that's no more than maybe once a week. So we're not hammering your inbox, but we're trying to bring to you things that are going to help you right where you are in your research. And the nice thing about signing up for the free newsletter is that you get my bonus ebook. And it gives you tons of my favorite genealogy websites. So be sure and get your copy of that. Well, if you have success finding maiden names using these strategies and tracking down these records, I hope that you will head to the show notes page for this episode. Again, it's number 288 on the website, and go down at the bottom of the page and leave a comment. Let me know what you found, how you found it, anything that you want to share with other gems that are listening to help them also in their family history research. Thank you so much for listening, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.